Jane Elliott, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, my wife showed me a recent New York Times article by Brianna Holt about you and your work. And my wife insisted that I should interview you. So, of course, I thought I should. And plus, I had heard of you, I think I had heard of your blue eyes, brown eyes exercise previously. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity to get into it because you've been an influential person, uh, and and I was just sharing with you that I said I came from a mixed race family, and you immediately corrected me. So yes, I did have a African American stepfather, black stepfather, and a half sister from that marriage. But you said.
I said you didn't have a mixed race family. You had a family that you might want to call mosaic. A mosaic is an art form that is new and beautiful and made of many different elements. So instead of calling people different races, families in which there are members of different colors, call that a mosaic family instead of a mixed race family. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. We are all members of the Homo sapien race. That's it. There is no other. There's no black race. There's no yellow race. There's no brown race. There is absolutely no white race. Your skin doesn't match your hair, neither does mine, because we are not white. We do not have white skin. We have
Right.
different shades of brown, and we need to get over the idea that white and black, because you see, white and black are opposites. White is the color of purity and goodness. Black is the color of evil and badness, and you
Yeah,
know that, and everybody else knows that.
that's
That's
always
that,
been
and
a
because
problem.
of that, those are the two words that were chosen by the members of those who ran the Spanish Inquisition. Torquemada and company decided that they would call people by those two colors so that we would be at odds, we would be at each other's throats forever
Yeah. Now
because we are total opposites.
you're in Iowa right now. Did you grow up in Iowa?
I grew older in Iowa. I grew up when I left here for a while, and then I came back and a sadder but wiser person. No, I
Okay.
didn't. You don't grow up if you stay in the same town that you were born in. You don't grow up. You just grow older. You don't grow up until you get out and look at the world from a different point of view.
Yeah.
Yes, I grew older in Iowa.
Yeah. The reason why I ask is I know that you're well known for an exercise that you conducted when you were a young teacher in Iowa, and you know, not all of our audience may have heard of you and that exercise. So, could you take us through that?
Yeah, what I do when I do the exercise is I separate people according to a physical characteristic over which they have no control, which is the color of their eyes.
Yeah.
Your eye color is caused by the same chemical that your skin color is. If you have a lot of melanin in your skin, your hair and your eyes are very dark hair, very dark skin, and very dark eyes. If you only have a little, you'll probably have either green or hazel or blue eyes. And so, since we have been separating people according to the amount of melanin in their skin for 225 years in this country, it makes perfectly good sense to separate them by the color in their eyes. And I learned that. I didn't come up with this by myself. I learned that from Adolf Hitler. One of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber during what has come to be called the Holocaust was eye color. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they threw you into the gas chamber because they thought you might be a Jewish person who was trying to pass. And they killed thousands of people on the basis of eye color
Wow.
alone. Our
Yes.
lesson plan for that day was to learn the Sioux Indian prayer that says, "Oh, Great Spirit, keep me from ever judging a man until I've walked a mile in his moccasins." I decided that not only after I heard about the killing of Martin Luther King Jr., who had been one of our heroes of the month in February, not only was I going to teach them the Sioux Indian prayer, I was going to arrange to have it answered for them. I decided that I would allow them to walk in the shoes of a child of color in my classroom for a day. And so I separated them according to the color of their eyes. I put brown-eyed people on the top and blue-eyed people on the bottom because I'm blue-eyed and most of the students in the room were blue-eyed, and I didn't want the power to be in the top on that first day. And
Yeah.
we all learned more that day than I've ever learned before or since. It was just absolutely appalling.
Now, what grade were these kids?
These kids were 9 years old. It was in third grade. They were going into fourth grade, and it was And they say to this day, it's the best thing they ever did in school, and it's the thing they remember the most.
Yeah. Now, I part of what I read was that you conducted this exercise actually the day after Martin Luther King was
Right, right,
assassinated in 1968. And
right.
did you make this exercise up on the spot, or had you heard of it somewhere?
I had heard of it from Adolf Hitler. That's one of the things Adolf Hitler did, was separate people according to the color of their eyes. And I thought, if it worked for Adolf Hitler with adults and killed people, it'll work for me with these little kids.
Yeah.
And this was going to be an exercise with 9-year-olds in one room. Nobody else was going to be involved, with one teacher whom they loved and trusted. It was going to end at the end of the day, and they were going to know that. But on Monday, I was going to reverse it, and they were going to know that. But I had no idea. I had no idea. I thought I knew about racism. My husband and I had lived in Waterloo, Iowa for 8 years, and my husband ran a grocery store for the National Tea Company in the north end of Waterloo, and that's the black section. Practically all of his customers were black, what we call black. And I learned, and he learned, that we had been lied to for years about black people.
Yes.
His black people, his black customers, weren't the ones who stole from him. The only one who stole from him regularly was the federal meat inspector, and he had to let him steal cheese every month that he was there, because if he didn't, the meat counter wouldn't pass inspection. The federal inspector wouldn't pass the meat counter. So
Uh,
he learned to go along to get along. And
yeah.
that's a lesson which black people learn all day, every day. Go along to get along. And if you don't believe that, everybody has to read this book. It is just absolutely remarkably brilliant. If you haven't read Ellis Coe's book, The Rage of a Privileged Class, you should get it and read it. And if you don't
Okay.
read the whole thing, just read chapter 3, which talks about the dozen demons, 12 things that black males have to do every day in order to exist in businesses and in education and workplaces in this country. You have to read this book. It is just mind-blowing when you realize what it takes to be a successful black man in this country. If you don't read that book, you don't know, because you haven't studied it. And we
Yeah.
don't study it because we figure we have decided what black people are, and it never occurs to us that we know nothing about what black people are. We don't
Yeah.
have to know. They have to know all about us. We don't have
Right.
to know anything about them.
Going back to your exercise for a little bit, how did you get the notion across? Did you give the kids instructions of how the brown-eyed kids were to treat the blue-eyed kids?
No, no, you don't have to tell them how, because we have been giving them those instructions since before they were born. But we don't put it in writing. We show by example. I told my students that day, after we had talked about racism, we had talked about black people, and they had said all the ugly things they ever heard about black people. I said, "You kids have any idea how it would feel to be something other than white in this country?" "No." "Would you like no?" "Yeah, yeah." "Would you like to do something today that will help you know?" "Yeah, yeah." They thought they'd get out of spelling and handwriting if they just keep me talking long enough, because
Yeah.
that worked before.
Sure.
And I knew what they were doing. I said, "Okay, today we're going to judge people by the color of their eyes." And because I'm blue eyed, most of the students in this room are blue eyed. Brown eyed people are going to be on the top the first day. And immediately they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Blue eyed people aren't as smart as brown eyed people. They aren't as clean as brown eyed people. They aren't as civilized as brown eyed people. When you give blue eyed people something nice, what do they do with it?" And immediately those little kids said, "They reckon. Look at the way she acts all the time. And she's a bluey." I thought, oh my God, these kids know how to be racist. How did they learn how to be racist? And at that point, little brown eyed Debbie, sitting in the front row, looked up at me, and she's one of the sweetest kids I ever taught, looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" And I thought, oh, good Lord, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. I told her that she's smarter than I am, and she's 9 years old, and she has the power right now to challenge me because of the color of our eyes. This is how it works. I was absolutely shocked at how well she knew how to behave like a racist. I had never given her, as far as I knew, lessons in Racism 101. But she learned that from her immediate environment, from the significant adults in her environment. She knew exactly how to treat someone who was a different color in some respect than she was. And at that point, blue-eyed Alan Moss said, "Ah, Debbie, if she didn't have them blue eyes, she'd be the principal or the superintendent." Now, he was defending me, not as his teacher, but as a member of his race. If I didn't have those blue eyes, I was smart enough to be principal or superintendent. The only thing that was keeping him from being principal or superintendent was the color of my eyes. I thought, oh, good Lord, what have we done with these kids? Why are these kids how do these kids learn this? And I thought, you idiot, you taught them this. You and all the other significant adults in their environment taught them to behave this way. I watched horrible things happen that day, and I watched remarkable things. I had 4 dyslexic boys in my classroom that year. They were all brown-eyed. On the day those brown-eyed boys were on the top in that exercise, they read words I knew they couldn't read, and they spelled words I knew they couldn't spell, and they knew they couldn't. And at the end of the day, Billy Thompson, brown-eyed Billy Thompson, came up to my desk and said, Mrs. Elliott, where's my spelling paper? I said, what do you want it for, Billy? He said, I want to take it home and show it to my mother. She thinks I can't spell, and I can. He was crying, and I was crying,
Whoa.
because he had been living down to teachers' expectations of him
Yes.
ever since kindergarten. And he had been living down to my expectations of him because I listened to what his previous teachers said about him in the teacher's lounge in the Riceville Community Elementary School. Now, there should be a sign over the door of every teacher's lounge in every school in the United States of America, and it should say, caution, contents herein may be hazardous to students' health. We put warnings on cigarette packages, and we put warnings on liquor bottles. We ought to put warnings on teachers' lounges, because horrible expectations are laid down for students by teachers in the teacher's lounge. We ought to put a stop to that nonsense. I know we have freedom of speech, but there are some things you have no right to say, and nasty things about your students because you can't teach them. You'd best just go in and say, I'm a lousy teacher, I can't teach those 3 kids.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, these kids can't learn, there's something wrong with them. No, 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 no. We've got the whole thing upside down. On the other hand, I watched Carol, the Lutheran minister's daughter. She came into my room in February, reading at the 6th grade level. In 3rd grade, she had a steel-trap mind. However, on the day she was on the bottom in that exercise, she forgot how to spell. She read very haltingly. She walked with her shoulders hunched as if to ward off an expected blow. And I had taught her how to multiply the first 15 minutes she was in my classroom. The first day she came into my classroom. On the day she had the wrong color eyes, she forgot how to multiply. She came in from recess crying. I said, what's going on here? As she walked across the playground, 2 brown-eyed Debbies and a brown-eyed Cindy stepped up behind her. One of them reached up, struck her across the back with her forearm. And when Carol turned around, Debbie said to her, now you have to apologize to me for getting in my way because I'm better than you are.
Wow.
That would never have happened if I had not introduced racism based on eye color into my classroom. And the kinds of confrontations that you see between people of different color groups would never have happened in this country if we had not deliberately introduced racism into the school system and perpetuated it to this day. They've done studies in the United States of those who graduate from college with lots of degrees, and they found that the longer you stay in school, the more bigoted you become, because the more you are reinforced in what you learn grades K through 12. And what you learn grades K through 12 is things like Columbus discovered America. Now, you cannot discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before you got there. They discovered it before you got there. I don't care what language you use. And you also need to know, if you haven't read Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you need to read that. And you need to read The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. And you'll find out that we are all descendants of those first Black people who evolved in sub-Saharan Africa between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago. There isn't a person on the face of the earth who doesn't have in their genes some DNA from a Black person, because that's the way it is. We are all members of the same race. We are all members of the same race. And it started out with very, very dark-skinned people. Get over it. And somebody made me this lovely mask for me to wear when I go out of the house. See what it says?
Get over it.
Get over it. I wear it and people say, why do you wear that? Because I want you to get over your racism. It's ridiculous, it's unreasonable, and
Yeah.
it's the sign of ignorance.
Yeah.
And
Now,
if you think I'm lying
started
about that, you
you-
have to get this magazine. National Geographic magazine for April of 2018. See these 2 girls? They
Yeah.
have a Black father and a white mother.
Yeah.
Would you call these girls biracial?
Probably not. Maybe. Yeah.
Well,
Maybe.
yeah,
Well,
I suspect you would if you
but-
didn't have to think about it.
Yeah.
But they have, both of their parents came from planet Earth. They are
Yes.
not
Right.
biracial.
Yeah.
They are mosaic. A mosaic is an art form that is new and beautiful and unique and made of many different elements. That's what these two girls are. They
Yeah.
aren't biracial. They both are from the same race, the human race, Homo sapiens. That's what they are. They are not biracial. We've got to get those languages, that language out of our lexicon when we talk about people.
Now you got into hot water as a result of doing this exercise, right?
Well, it was more like lukewarm water because they couldn't really make it hot for me. Yeah, all the teachers stopped speaking to me. School board members got elected on the basis of they ran on the platform of get rid of the town's only N-word lover. They got elected every year, and every year they'd come to the first meeting and say, we've got to get rid of Elliott. And the superintendent would say, you weren't elected to hire and fire teachers. That's my job. Now I'm going to teach you your job. And I was never threatened with loss of a job by the superintendent or the last principal told me I couldn't do the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. So I had to teach him something about that. And then we did the exercise and he offered to help me. It was, yeah, my kids, however, suffered a whole lot. They were beaten and spit on. Their belongings were destroyed. They were abused by their peers, by their teachers, and by some of the parents of some of their peers.
My
And
goodness.
after 3 years, the principal, the elementary principal's wife, who was teaching at the high school, stopped me at a teachers meeting and said, Jane, get your kids out of this school. These teachers are trying to destroy your children.
Wow.
So we moved 17 miles away, and I continued to teach there. The kids went to another school, and they were trying to get rid of the problem, which was me, and that didn't work. So I went right on doing what I do, and they had no choice but to put up with it. And it was the teachers who were the problem. It wasn't the administrators. When
Well,
the Des Moines Register interviewed the superintendent many years later, and he said, they said, why didn't you fire Mrs. Elliott? He said, because I knew what she was doing was right, and I couldn't fire her for doing the right thing.
yeah, yeah, wonderful. What kind of family did you grow up in? So much of racism is learned, I think, in the family. Uh, what was your family like?
Yeah, my father was a Baptist, a believing Baptist.
Uh-huh.
He didn't go to church, but he believed in the Bible and read the Bible. My mother was a Catholic and didn't really and she was a very casual Catholic, but they didn't talk about religion. That's one thing they didn't fight about. They wouldn't fight about religion. And they didn't insist that we go to either church. So I grew up, we sang, my sisters and brother and I sang in the Methodist church choir for years, and all the time we were in high school. And that was probably the most valuable experience, besides having been raised by a father who said, you don't judge a book by its cover. And he said, a fair thing is a pretty thing, and a right wrongs no man. And he said, judge not that ye be not judged. But he also said, don't bring any pickaninnies home to my house as grandchildren. And then my daughter, as we grew older, after I got married, and my daughter married a man in Saudi Arabia. And she had a baby after they'd been married several years. And they brought that baby home, and I put her in my father's arms. And this man looked up at that baby and he said, this is the most beautiful child I've ever seen. He's been a farmer all his life.
Yeah.
And he looked up at my daughter and her husband and he said, now that's a good cross. See, he knew about breeding animals. He knew that. And he looked up at her and said, that's a good cross. He knows a good cross when he saw one. I was absolutely, absolutely, totally grateful
Yeah.
and pleased and proud. And he changed his attitude toward race as a result of seeing the first film that was made in my classroom when my kids went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. The second year we did the exercise, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation sent a film crew to Riceville to film it. And you haven't seen that film because it's never been shown in this country. But they sent me a copy of it, and I took it up to the hotel which we owned and my parents were living in. I showed it to my parents. My dad must have been at least 59 years old at that time. He watched that half-hour film with those little white kids going through that agony. And when it was over, he stood up, he took his red handkerchief out of the back pocket of his bib overalls, he blew his nose, he wiped his eyes, and he said, I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old.
This this took on a life of its own. Really became an activist. How did that evolve for you?
Well, I did the exercise in my classroom. And then in the 10 years after the first group went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, PBS sent a film crew to film their class reunion. And that hit the airwaves in 1985. And as a result of that, the several corporations called and asked me if I would do the exercise with their corporation members, their employees. So I did. And that's
Uh-huh.
what I did. That's what I've been doing ever since. And it worked with that's what is so scary about this whole thing. It is so terrifying when you realize that inside every one of us, there's a child that's waiting to get out. There is a child ego stage in every one of us.
Sure.
And when you are in your adult ego state or your parent ego state, and you treat them like children, they become childlike in their reactions to what you're doing. The first time I did that with a group of adults was a group of Rotarians in the town I'm living in now. And as a result of that, a couple of those men would never speak to me again as long as I lived. And I mean, they were serious about it because they had been mistreated for half an hour because of the color of their eyes. And you think, oh my God, if that is this powerful, just because of the color of your eyes done by one person in a group of about 30 or 40 people, what must it be like to go through that every day for a lifetime at the hands of the entire population, anybody who doesn't look like you? What
Yeah.
must that do to your soul? What is it in Black people and Native American people that they aren't ready to kill us? What is it that they have? What coping skills have they developed that we pale faces haven't developed?
Yeah. Yeah.
What I just see, my heroes are Black women because they keep on keeping on no matter what you do to them. You can't put them down. They refuse to be put down, even though you're going to do this to them for a lifetime, and you're going to do it to their daughters and their sons and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren, because we have the right in this country to be ignorant where race is concerned. We have the right to believe in the lie of several different races.
Yeah.
There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. And all these others are color groups. They are not races. They are all color groups. They are not races. We are all members of the same species. Get over it.
Right. Put on your mask. Get
Put
over.
on my mask, and here we
Yeah.
go. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, isn't racism also about things other than color? For example, socioeconomic status, class, etc., cultural.
All those things, the way we treat all those people and all those differences is because of the model that we have constructed where race is concerned. The number one ignorance in this country is racism. And we use what we do to Blacks to decide how we can treat all those others who are different. If you think about it, it is just mind-blowing that we have spent billions and billions of dollars on education. I'm an educator, and the word educator comes from the root duc dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. And if we in education had been doing that for the last 250 years in this country, we would not have racism. And if we didn't have racism to use for a model, we would have to figure out different ways of treating all those other differences. And we could, but we haven't, because we have a model to use, and it's racism. The President's Joint Council on Mental Health in Children in 1959 identified racism as the number one mental health in children in the United States of America. And they didn't say in Black children, they said in children. Because if you base your self-image on the amount of a chemical in your skin, you have a problem. You have a problem of miseducation. If we did a good job of educating, we could educate our way out of this mess. I know we could, because the kids who went through my classroom and went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise are different from their peers to this day. And they say to this day, yeah, we're different. We don't say the same things that our friends do. And we have to correct our friends when they say those things. And
Yeah.
you ought to see the film, A Class Divided, because those kids came back, I think it was their 10-year class reunion, and PBS sent a film crew, and they filmed those adults and some of their children
Right.
talking about what happened to them in third grade. You ought to take a look at that film, because people who say it won't work, it doesn't last, are absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
You realize that racism works. We have kept people down and kept them convinced of their ineptitude and their unworthiness. And if you don't believe it, you read this and you'll find out that yes, we have. And yes, we still are. And yes, it works. If it didn't work, we'd stop doing it. Simple as that.
Yeah. So what was your reaction with the recent Black uprising and social justice movement and the,
I think it's absolutely brilliant and it's absolutely necessary. And I think we knew that that had to happen. If people haven't read this, they need to hear it. Frederick Douglass said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Where justice is denied, that's in the United States. Where poverty is enforced, that's in the United States. Where ignorance prevails, oh my God, if you think ignorance doesn't prevail here, you have to tell me how we got who we have as our present leader. And where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe." He also said, and I think this is brilliant, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." I
yeah,
think that is absolutely brilliant. And I
yeah,
think those people who are protesting peacefully and who are being accused of violence, when there are outsiders who come in and do the violent acts and
yeah,
then they blame it on all of them.
right.
And those protesters now are not just Black people, they are people of all ages and all colors and all
Yes.
genders and all sexual orientations. I think it's the most beautiful thing that I have seen in my lifetime,
Yeah, that's
is people of
heartening.
all different kinds protesting together. And I want them to keep it up.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is to see how this has ignited in other countries around the world. So it's not just the
Right,
US. It's
right.
an issue between
It's always
human
been there.
beings.
It's always been there because we white folks have gone all over the world teaching people to be racist. And now people all over the world are saying, this is the leader of the Western world. Well, let's follow these protesters. We've been doing something ugly. Let's stop doing the ugly. I've talked in England. I've worked in Germany. I've worked in lots and lots of places. People ask me to come and speak and do the exercise, and I do. People in other places. And for a couple
Uh-huh.
of years, I had to apologize for coming from the United States because W was our president, and I had to say, look, I'm not a Republican. You don't have to worry about that. But now, if I went overseas now, I would have to apologize for who our president is, because this is insane. What we are doing is insane.
Yeah. Have you suffered at all for this position that you take so strongly? Are there critics out there of you and your work?
A man right now, David, what's his name, who has written a book about the people who are trying to destroy Trump. I can't remember the name. Horowitz, David Horowitz. When I first did the exercise and got on the Johnny Carson show, David Horowitz wrote a long editorial about what an awful person I am. He and Max Rafferty was was the head of the education in California, whatever you call it. And he wrote a long editorial about what an awful person I am. And now here is David Horowitz. Max Rafferty's dead, but David Horowitz is right back to doing things that he ought to know enough to keep his mouth shut now. Somebody sent me a sweatshirt on which it say, "There's always time to shut up." And I think I'll send a copy of that to him, because he needs to stop what he's doing. He was wrong 52 years ago and he's wrong today. And yeah, I got lots of flack, but I would tell my dad what was going on. You would go up to the hotel and talk to my dad about what was going on during the day, because it was ugly on the part of the teachers. And he'd say, "Well, just keep on smiling. They'll wonder what the hell you're up to." And he was right, because as vicious as they were being, they didn't know how I could keep on smiling, and I did, because you know they couldn't stop me, and the principal and the superintendent didn't try to stop me, and they realized that I was doing the right thing, and they rehired me every year. So I didn't think I had to listen to the remarks made by the teachers.
Yeah.
It was ugly for my children. My children were beaten, they were spit on, their belongings were destroyed. And I told you, the principal's wife told me, "Jane, you've got to get these kids out of this school. These teachers are trying to destroy them." And they worked hard at it. So we moved and I put the kids in a different school. and I kept on driving back and forth to school. So they didn't get rid of me, but I took my kids out of danger at that situation.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
mother kicked me out of the family after my father died. She said, nobody's comfortable when you're around. Well, you see, you can't sing I Don't Want Her, You Can Have Her, She's Too Fat for Me when I'm around. I consider that's a really ugly song. And you can't tell racist jokes and you can't tell Muslim jokes. And so I really make people uncomfortable. I change their conversation.
Hmm. Uh, what is your prognosis as you look at what's happening in the world right now? We're in a very difficult place. Um,
We're in a difficult place because we made a really bad decision for 3.5 years ago,
yeah.
a really bad decision.
Yeah.
And in fact, that decision was made by 4 electoral college groups who didn't know why Thomas Jefferson put the electoral college in the Constitution. He put it in there so that no one who was unfit for the job of the presidency would get that job. They didn't realize that, so they voted the way the state said they should. In fact, they had the responsibility not to vote that way because they deliberately put in a position someone who isn't qualified for that position, who has no right to be there, and he is unfit for the job. But the people who were in the electoral colleges didn't realize what they were doing. They made a mistake
Yeah.
because Hillary Clinton, whom I didn't want to be president, but I voted for in protest of the other one, she couldn't possibly have done a worse job than has been done in the last 3.5 years. This is really scary, what we're going through right now. And I was born the year Franklin Roosevelt and Adolf Hitler came to power. So I remember the Second World War, and I remember Vietnam, and I remember Korea, and I remember the women's movement. I remember the civil rights movement. I've seen all that. I've heard all that. And most of these young people don't realize that what is happening in this country and has been for the last 3.5 years is Hitlerian. This is
Right.
exactly what Hitler did. And if you don't believe
Right.
that, then you need to get this book.
Well,
Everybody has to read this
yeah.
book. When at times the mob is swayed. Have you read this book?
I have not, but I do believe what you're saying about it being
Oh God,
Hitlerian.
yes.
It's like
Oh yeah, here
the 30s and the late 30s in
it's
Germany.
yeah, and it's worse than that because it says in here Donald Trump's wife. We know from he studied at the feet of the master. We know from Ivana Trump's now sealed testimony at Trump's first divorce trial, backed up by her lawyer, Michael Kennedy, and from the president himself, that for years a younger Donald Trump slept with a book of Adolf Hitler's collected political speeches published in 1941 as My New Order in a locked cabinet at his bedside. The things that he's doing today are based on what he learned from reading the writings of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
And people who say that's it, I'm imagining it, I'm hysterical, are wrong. He is doing exactly what he was taught to do by studying that person. People need to realize that we are on the verge of losing our democracy. If
I'm
he is
very
not
worried. Yeah.
voted out of power, we
Right.
could lose our democracy. And these people who are saying, well, he's done good things for us. He's done good things for us. He hasn't done good things for anyone except the top 1%. And if you haven't read Robert Reich's book, The System,
Yeah.
Who Rigged It and How to Fix It, you better get that book and read it. Every single person who hears these statements had better get that book and realize I'm not making this up, and it isn't coming out of a diseased old brain. It's coming out of the mouth of someone who has read those things and lived through that. I
Yeah.
realize that what he's doing looks like Hitler because it is like Hitler.
Right.
He is an authoritarian who unfortunately has never he has never developed an adult ego state. He spends all his time in either his child or parent ego state. He never acts like an adult.
Yeah. I can't argue with that. I'm on the same page. Um, so you've recommended a number of books. I think you've really gotten your message out here to my audience. Is there any sort of final message that you'd like our audience to
Yeah,
absorb?
yeah, they need to go to school and challenge their teacher to take this map off the wall and to take it out
Because,
of kids' sight because this is the Mercator projection. And look at the size of Greenland on this map. and look
Yeah.
at the size of South America.
Okay.
This
Yes.
map, and look, yeah, and look at the size of Canada. It stretches from hell to breakfast.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. On this map, the equator is 2/3 of the way down the map. So you can't call the northern part of this the northern hemisphere, because hemi means half a sphere. This is a map that was made in because the Pope wanted a map that showed the spread of Christianity. So Mercator made a map that showed the spread of Christianity. At
Huh.
the bottom of the Mercator map, it says, the last line in the legend says, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. That's what's on the bottom of most of these maps. South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. Now, do you want to talk about kids not being able to develop properly?
Yeah.
Here is a new map. Now, I don't get anything by pushing these maps on people. I am not selling maps. I'm an educator. I'm trying to lead people out of ignorance. Look at the
Yeah.
size of South America here and the size of Greenland. Look at the size of Africa. Africa is 14 times as big as Greenland. This map is fair to all peoples. The shapes are distorted. The sizes and the locations are right. And you can get this map from odtmaps.com. Everybody better get a copy of this map, send it to school with your child, but have it laminated first, because if you don't, it'll get torn when the teacher tries to put it up, because she doesn't really want to change how she sees the world. But you have to teach children the right way to see the world instead of the wrong way.
Interesting. Now, what is that map called? Does it, if one's
This
called
is
the
the
Mercator
Peters,
map, what's this one called?
no, this is the Peters projection map made by a man named Arlo Peters. And I can't remember the year, but it's been recently.
Oh,
Everybody should have a copy of this map
ah,
because it tells the truth.
yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
And the equator is at 0 degrees, halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole, which
Yeah.
is where it's supposed to be. So you see, if you're using this all the time, you are deliberately or unknowingly creating cognitive dissonance in kids, and
Yeah.
you're teaching them not to believe everything they read in they see in the classroom. This map isn't real. This map is closer to the truth. It's time to start teaching the truth. And instead of teaching the 3 R's of reading, writing, arithmetic, only one of which begins with R, which is reading, we need to teach the 3 R's of rights, respect, and responsibility.
All right. Well, that's a good, strong closing statement. Jane Elliott, I want to thank you for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio. Keep up your good work.
Well, I'm going to, whether they like it or not.